One of the great spiritual books is called I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. And it's interesting that on the back cover it has a quote of his which says that if a building collapses, does it affect space? Or more importantly, it says when a building collapses, nothing happens to the space. Space is space, it's immutable. What happens within space is the lives that we live. And of course, today being the 10th anniversary of 9/11, collapsing buildings appears to be part of the collective unconscious. It's hard to get away from. You can try, I tried. Every magazine I get, every newspaper I get, front and center, collapsing buildings. And it seems like a philosophical idea in a moment as real as the collapse of the Twin Towers, that somehow nothing changed, that space remained the same. Because we're also completely caught in the web of material life, that the idea that somehow there's a changeless space in which all of this transforms itself, that we live in a state of endless change and rarely glimpse the unchangeable. Most of us live a life of rather extraordinary unconsciousness and indifference. Not true indifference, because we're really pretty caught up in our own pursuits, our own drama. But we're pretty indifferent to the rest of it. And most days we go through kind of like a dream. We just kind of do the stuff that's in front of us. We take care of business. We go to work. We ride the subway, or we get in the car, or whatever it is that we do, and we live this life that passes by. Lots of transformation and lots of change, but all so minuscule we hardly observe it. And every so often something happens that goes, whoa, this is real, this is real. And every so often it happens across the board collectively, and we all experience it at the same time. And the collapse of the World Trade Center, of those two buildings, was one of those moments. It riveted our collective mind into a state of extraordinary singular focus. And in that focus, we all became connected, or more importantly, recognized our connection to each other. It was pretty horrific, scary, sad, and on some level we all understood in that moment that nothing is sacred and that nothing is permanent. I think a lot of us also began to wonder how we would have faced the moment that those people in the tower faced. What do you do when the past catches up with the future and you're in the moment and there's no future? There's nowhere forward. The past is over. There is nothing but that moment. Probably you have, if you're one of the fortunate few, a second or two to reflect on that moment. And you probably have a choice of how you're going to end this particular existence of yours. More than likely, you will feel how totally and completely unprepared you are for that moment. That nothing in you ever imagined you would face it. Which is absurd, of course, because every one of us faces it in one way or another, not always that dramatically. But we all face this moment of no more future. No more. It's over. And the only place you can look, in a sense, is the past, but if you don't have much time, you can't really explore that very much. So all you have is this, right now. Probably with your heart pounding 1,000,000 miles a minute. Probably with an enormous amount of what I would call ego or even deeper biological fear. How do I face this moment? One of the powerful images from that day was somebody jumping off one of the high windows and assuming what looked like, in the still picture they captured, a Superman pose. Diving, it felt like consciously taking a position of defiance and saying, I am going out on my terms. It was very powerful. For me, it was very powerful. I don't think anybody could look at that image for very long because it brought up so much stuff. But what it brought up more than anything else is, what would I do? What would I do? What would I be thinking in that, 40 seconds that you have on the way down? What are you thinking? Are you thinking? Where is your head? Let me say this about that. Life will never be more real than in that moment. And in a certain sense, we all approach it. We're all approaching it right at this second. Every one of us is heading headlong down the side of that building into some deep unknown. And whether you're aware of it or not aware of it is sort of your choice. And how do you choose to embrace that moment? What do you choose to make of that moment? Are you going to just scream and yell and go, why me? Or do you even get to a place that says yes instead of no? Which may be all you can pull off. Just say yes. Surrender. Open. Don't fight it. Be with it. It may be that all the years of spiritual training, all the years of meditation, all the years of trying to sit still and let go are about that moment. And it may be a huge difference between going like that and like going like that. And it may take a lifetime of training to arrive at that capacity. There are awakened souls, as we've talked about a lot in this class, whose ego mind at that point may no longer be operating in the same way that most people's minds are operating. That it's already let go of the past and the future. That it's just in the present. But even that being, even the most awakened being at that moment, faces the biological end. And that biological end creates a biological event, a response. Whether your ego mind is involved in it or not, the body is involved in it. And that end is exactly what I'm talking about, whether you are a deeply meditative being or you're just a Joe Schmo on the street who suddenly is going, oh my God. And in truth, the Joe Schmo on the street may be as prepared as anybody else or as ill-prepared as anybody else. Preparation may have nothing to do with it. You know, my wife went through childbirth twice, and we went to all the childbirth classes and breathe, and we practiced and practiced and practiced, but when the reality of the moment comes, there's a lot of screaming. There's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of effort, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just there. The preparation is perhaps of some value, but is it of real value? I'm not the one to tell you. But mostly all we're doing is preparing. I do know that my two boys were in Paris at one point in France and decided to go bungee jumping and decided to have a movie made of their bungee jumping. And it was really fascinating to watch. They jumped off a bridge very high up over a big chasm, and they walk out on a plank and stand at the end of the plank, and they have to jump. And I have a horrible fear of heights, so I could barely watch the video, let alone contemplate being on a bridge jumping off. My son Ari was the first one to go. Ari walked out to the edge of the bridge, and he went, and he jumped off. There was no hesitation, no question, nothing. I have no idea how he did it. I can't imagine where that fearlessness, courage comes from. But he had it, and it was really beautiful to watch. It was really beautiful. Then Josh went. And Josh went, and he got so frozen that he didn't want to go. And the guy who's running the bungee jumping thing kept walking with him, pushing him further out on the ledge. And every time Josh would take another step further, the guy would put his foot right behind him, so he couldn't step backward. And then Josh took another step, and you could feel the humanity. You could feel what everyone that I know, except my son Ari, would probably feel, which is this unbelievable fear of facing such a profound unknown with potential lethal consequences. But Josh kept moving toward the edge and moving toward the edge until there was nowhere else to move. He was there. And he stood there, and the guy behind him said, "You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, just do it." And the fear in Josh's face was so profound, and then something happened. He just found this place, this, I don't know what it is, courage, determination, will, surrender, openness, availability, or just yes. He just found it. And all of a sudden, he reached up and he did the most beautiful swan dive I have ever seen in my entire life into the abyss. And my heart broke. I started crying just watching the video. It was so powerful because he was all of us. He was all of us. Reaching that moment, fighting it every step of the way, and finally at one ultimate moment, rather than having to be pushed, rather than having to fall, rather than having to cover his head and scream and yell, he just accepted it, owned it, and went for it. That, to me, was a great teaching. Because we all ultimately face this end point. And we all face it probably with the same kind of biological resistance as everybody else. But it has an inevitability to it. There is no ultimate avoiding it. It also has something that none of us like, which is the possibility of surprise attack. It can come out of nowhere at any minute. So it's not a bad idea to be somewhat vigilant, not fearful, vigilant, available and prepared, so that when whatever this moment is occurs, you can just go, yes. It takes an enormous amount of something. And the question is, do you know if you have it? I will tell you this. If you've lived a life of unconsciousness and maybe denial, or an unexplored life, or an incomplete life, or a life full of regrets, or a life that's incomplete in some way inside, if you've lived a life of great closure and tension and holding pattern, I will venture to say that last moment will not be easy or satisfying. It will not be completing. The only way to complete your life is to live it completely. If you live your life and it comes to an end, it's okay. You can say yes. If you jump or go into it saying no, you have to figure that one out for yourself. But the whole idea of this meditative life is to not say no. And you learn how to not say no by saying yes. You learn to not say no by accepting life as it unfolds. You learn how to, as Rudy put it, walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and you fear no evil, even though you'll be shitting in your pants every step of the way. That was Joshua walking out on the end of the bridge. That will probably be most of us. It's okay. Just keep going forward, which means keep saying yes. Keep saying yes. Live your life. Don't fight it. Don't resist it. Don't keep it comfortable. Don't keep it protected. Just keep it alive. Keep it going. Keep it going. To me, that's the metaphor of the 9/11 event. It's to bring us into a collective awareness that we're all in this together, that we're all going to face the same journey, and in the end, no matter what happens, and no matter how many towers collapse, and no matter how many lives are ended, space does not change. It doesn't change. Space is what it is. Space is another word for presence, or God, or truth, or reality. No matter what happens within it, it is always what it is. And if you're lucky, you will awaken to that reality before that last moment. And then you get to live a life in touch with reality, presence, and space, to know that that's what you truly are, that this space is your true home, and that whatever evaporates or gets crushed or destroyed within it does not in any way demolish you, because you are that space. You are that presence. You are that truth. You are that reality. And when you know that, you will know that. And that's the teaching of spiritual practice. So, does anybody have any questions?
I saw my dad a couple weeks ago, And he's someone very, very unresolved and fearful. And he told me he was ready to go. And so there was a thought, like, how could he be ready to go? He's so unresolved, but it seems like there's an acceptance of fear or something too.
Well, I think life is so brilliantly constructed that many people, unresolved, resolve very quickly at the end. You know, they get it. They go, oh, this was a journey, it's coming to an end, and that's that. And it's a beautiful thing. It can happen to people. And there's no reason to be critical of that. I mean, judgmental of it. It's very hard for spiritual people to hear that. I worked my whole life to get there and they didn't do anything. But that's the way it works. You don't have to do anything. On the other hand, my grandfather was 103, and they told him when he had a heart, something happened. What happened exactly? Heart failure, called heart failure. They were going to the hospital and they said, we can do something to try to save you here if you would like. He said, no, I'm ready. Which was beautiful. And then suddenly he went, oh! He had never faced what it meant to be ready. And he got scared to death, said, save me, save me. And there was nothing they could do. And he went out pretty scared. Because it's one thing to say you're ready, it's another thing to be ready. Another friend of mine's father, who I talk about fairly often, was 96 years old, dying, and he was on his deathbed, and he said, why me? And you go, what do you mean, why me? Well, you resolve that before you're 96, most people. It's hard to get to 96 and still not know that this is in the works, It's kind of crazy. So I can't tell you what the right path is to this, and I have no idea what your father's situation was. I know that my own father-in-law, when he passed, I was with him, and it was a remarkable thing, and he had a beautiful passing, a truly beautiful passing. But what I understood in that moment, and I've talked about it a lot, so you may have heard it, is that he lived a good life. He simply lived a good life, what I call the Ten Commandment life. He didn't break any commandments in his life, as far as I know, and that's all we're asked to do. That's the rule book, perhaps. Live a good life, and you leave. It's when you break the rules, you kill someone, you steal, you do these other things, suddenly you have these holding patterns of regret or grief or unsettled nature, and that's what you have to deal with. That's hard. That's hard, because you can't resolve all that in the last 12 seconds of your life, I don't think. I think it takes more work than that. But what do I know? Maybe that's not true, which would be terrific. Whatever it is, done, free, you're a limitless joy. But, I've had my own earlier experiences with the universe wanting to embrace me. For me, it was very clearly, at that point, Christ. And I was walking on a hillside, and Christ was at the top. And I'm walking up the hillside to Christ, and I'm Jewish, so it was a little bit of I wasn't exactly sure why I was walking toward Christ, but I've always been an admirer. And Christ opened his heart to me so deeply and was so totally loving and accepting of me on every level that I could not bear it. And I turned and ran down the hill as fast as I could. And I did that because his love would have annihilated me. It would have annihilated Bruce. And that was very disturbing to me at that time. Now, bring it on. But it was very, I understood what happens to many people facing truth, facing ultimate love, ultimate acceptance. The problem isn't being accepted. The problem is allowing yourself to be accepted. The problem is that we don't accept ourselves, and that ultimately is the condemnation that we face. So getting through that is the life's work. That's the work Rudy said. Spiritual work is a life's work. That's, to me, what it's about. getting rid of or past all that stuff. And you got to go into the core of it, not into the superficial parts. The core stuff. Really free it, liberate it, dig into it, at least face it, at least accept that it's there, and then to whatever degree possible, make peace. And if someone like your dad can just jump in and do it in an instant, that's a wonderful thing. And it's a wonderful thing to tell people, because God willing, that it will work that way. Anyone else?
Yeah, it brings up questions for me because I'm a therapist and I have patients who say they're ready to go, but they're depressed and they're afraid to accept and face life, so they're running from life. So I don't know if I would say they're really ready to
Well,
die.
no, I mean, no, I think in many ways, I think exactly what you're saying is right. People say I'm ready, meaning get me out of here.
Right.
And the only way out is through. You cannot get out of life
By dying.
by dying. Dying, I believe, this is my theory of it, dying brings you into everything you're running from. So you might as well work it out now. You have to pass through life. It has to be in life. The truth is this moment. And if you're in avoidance of this moment, you're avoiding the truth of you. And so finding a way toward that, finding a way into that, is really what's important. And how do you do it? I love the movie What About Bob? A friend of mine wrote that, Tom Schulman, he's brilliant. And it's a movie about baby steps. These little tiny baby steps forward. That's all we have to do. Meditation is kind of taking baby steps forward until you've actually walked a lifetime's worth of baby steps. That's a lot of distance. And you grow. A lot of people are afraid to start that midlife or at the end of their life because they think how many miles they have to go. But it's always better to start it at some point than not. Plus, at the end of life, you have a lot of ground, you have a lot of material to work with. You have a lot of intelligence, a lot of insight. You have a lot of exposure to life, so you can make some real progress. So, I think trying to say you're ready as a way of avoiding life is not going to be your answer. I think you got to love life deeply in order to fully embrace death. Anyone else? Okay. Another class next week here, and then I'll be gone for a couple of weeks, and then we'll have a few more classes in October, a little November, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.